before Tae-soo completely closed his eyes. His mind took him back to his childhood, to a memory he could never erase. He saw himself, a fragile and fearful child, apologizing to his father for something beyond his control, being born as a non-awakened being. His father's response was immediate and cruel. Without a word, he delivered a strong slap that sent him to the ground. Tae-soo barely had time to recover, for his father abruptly turned toward his mother. What came next was even worse. His small ears filled with the screams of his mother's pain as his father mercilessly beat her. Desperate, the hidden child covered his ears with both hands, trying to block out the sounds, clinging to the hope that if he couldn't hear them, maybe the horror would disappear. But there came a point where it was impossible to ignore. His body trembled with fear, but his heart pounded with an unfamiliar rage. And then, without thinking twice, he grabbed a knife and lunged at his father. With all his strength, he jumped and plunged the blade into his father's neck. Blood gushing out immediately. But the most shocking thing happened in the next instant. He felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. His father's powers transferred into him. And for the first time in his life, Tae-soo experienced what it meant to possess that. His surprise was immense, but his mother's was not the same. Despite the fact that her son had saved her life, she did not look at him with gratitude, but with something colder, more distant. And without saying a single word, she made her decision. She fled. She left behind her home and her children, as if she couldn't bear to face what she had just witnessed. That was when his brother appeared, calling Tae-soo by name. His gaze fell on their father's lifeless body, and on the little boy's face, uncertainty about what would come next was reflected. After that, what happened next is something everyone knows. Events unfolded with the inevitability of a fate already written, as if each action was predestined to follow its course, with no possibility of change. But what not everyone knew was that while Tae-soo slept peacefully, he was actually being tormented. Within him resided countless people, their memories and powers intertwined, in his mind like a constant echo of the past. Every night, in his dreams, those figures chased him, tormenting him with their presence, plunging him into an endless cycle of suffering. Their screams, their resentful gazes, and their unending pain trapped him in a nightmare from which he could not escape. And like every time, he woke up with a start, his breath wriggling from terror. Beside him, the healer watched him calmly. Her gaze conveyed understanding and a certain sadness as she asked the same question as always, another nightmare. She understood his suffering better than anyone. After all, she was aware of the burden he carried inside, of what it meant to harbor within his body the mana and memories of so many people. She murmured that it must be painful, everything he had experienced, everything he still carried within him. Then, as if she needed to grasp the magnitude of his burden, she asked how many people lived inside him. But Tae-soo was exhausted, tired of everything, sick of the curse that pursued him without respite. With bitterness, he asked if she could seal that ability. The healer shook her head before replying that she could only heal wounds, but not seal something like that. If he truly wanted to rid himself of it, then he would have to do it himself. Her response fell like an unbearable weight on Tae-soo's shoulders. Enraged, he cursed her under his breath. If he could do it, he would have already done it. Desperate, he fell to his knees on the ground, clenching his fists in helplessness. It couldn't be possible. Things couldn't stay this way. They had to meet again. His words were not directed at the healer, but at Yeju, his friend who had been eliminated. With a heavy eye, he closed his eyes and let the memories envelop him. At first, he tried to bring Yeju back, but it was all in vain. Every attempt failed, and his desperation grew until it consumed him completely. However, in his anguish, he found an idea. Intense gravity distorts space-time. That was the key. He didn't need to resurrect Yeju. What he really needed was time, and now he was convinced he could recover it. With this idea in mind, he began to experiment. For countless days and nights, he explored the limits of gravity-based powers, tested in more than 14,000 skill combinations. In the process, he destroyed entire continents and came close to death dozens of times. But his determination never wavered. In the end, he succeeded. He had managed to turn back time. However, there was a fatal problem. No matter how many times he tried it or how much he perfected his technique, he always encountered the same unbreakable barrier. He could not return to a point before he threw Ji-hyung into the red puddle. Every time he tried, he could not go back before Yeju's death. No matter how much he tried or how many times, he repeated the prayers. That was the question that tormented him relentlessly. Why? What was the reason that limited him? In his desperation, he wondered if, by closing the red portal, the timeline had fractured, splitting into different realities. If that was true, then it meant he no longer had access to the exact point he needed to reach. However, after reflecting more calmly, he dismissed that idea. No, it couldn't be that. Something else had to be happening, something he had yet to understand. Convinced that there had to be a way, he began using all the knowledge and resources he possessed. He would not let the laws of time stop him. But despite using every available tool, exhausting all possible strategies, and attempting to turn back time countless times, the result was always the same: an absolute failure. Each attempt led him to the same conclusion. He could not change what had already happened. And so, after countless failures and a desperation that threatened to consume him completely, he finally stopped trying. Now, in the present, his gaze was fixed on Kang Ji-hyung. He blamed him for everything. With cold determination, he undid his own body, only to reconstruct it immediately in front of his opponent. The hunter, driven by his fierce will to survive, refused to give in. He would not die there, not without doing everything possible to eliminate him first. With that thought in mind, he concentrated his energy and formed in his hand the power to turn back time. He expanded it, increasing its reach, ensuring that his only chance would not be wasted. He could not allow his fate to end this way. The unleashed power enveloped Tae-soo, absorbing him and dragging him into the flow of time. He returned 24 hours back. Realizing what he had accomplished, a smile crossed his face. He had returned. However, his joy was short-lived. Exactly 24 hours later, the result was the same. He lost again. This became his 138th regression and death.
And with that, we've reached the end of this week's chapter. If you made it all the way to the end, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this chapter in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe so our community can keep growing and we can reach more fans like you. See you in the next video. In the meantime, if you're from the near future, I'll leave you the next chapter and a comic you're sure to enjoy. Thank you for being part of this adventure.